suffering and the existence of it in our world is it logically inconsistent, forgive me, with the existence of God?
So the short answer is no, absolutely not. But we got to unpack this. So the argument that you're proposing has three levels to it. The first one is, if you believe in God, he's got to be omniscient, omnipotent, so all-powerful, all-knowing, and you say that he's good. And therefore, the second step of that is, if he is all-powerful and he is good, therefore he should be able to control all things and ensure that there is no evil. And then finally, because there is evil, then that must mean that he's either not good or he's not as all-powerful and as all-knowing as you make him out to be. The problem is that there's humongous assumptions that are made when it comes to that false kind of reasoning, that unless you unpack it, it sounds like it's a reasonable argument, where in reality it really isn't. So among the things that people make the mistake of making is suggesting that because God is all-powerful, that must mean that God can do all things. Well, let's understand this. He can do all things as long as they are within the bounds of what is reasonable. What does that mean? C.S. Lewis describes it as attributing arguments towards God that are nonsensical. It's this idea of saying, can God create something so heavy that he himself can't lift it? Because what you are describing is nonsensical, to pose it as a question or taking a sentence that makes zero sense, that has no rationale behind it, and then adding before it, if God, then you add that nonsensical statement. That doesn't make it reasonable in any way. To suggest that, can God therefore, because he's all-powerful, make a square circle? No. Because what you are asking God to do is to step outside of the bounds of reason. So when we say that God is all-powerful, it has to be understood within the reality of who God is, and because he is the author of truth, all things must make sense in him. He is the one who introduces logic, reason. He is the author of all that is ordered. He cannot be a God of chaos. To suggest a statement that implies chaos or disorder cannot apply to God. Secondly, this idea of goodness and suffering. You're implying there that all forms of suffering are intrinsically evil, but we know that this is not true, even from our own lives. The same aspect can apply to this understanding of how it is that we look at people who undergo certain levels of willful suffering for the sake of being able to compete at the highest levels, for instance, in the Olympics. When we take a look at our soldiers who are willing to be able to undergo extreme amounts of training and they put their bodies through an extreme amount of stress. Those who apply ascetic rules to themselves to be able to really achieve great heights. We don't see that as something that is evil. We see that as something to be celebrated and applauded. So are all forms of suffering intrinsically evil? Of course not. And then finally, there is this idea of, because God knows something will happen, does that then mean that he is the author of that thing? Well, no. God's foreknowledge of something that will happen doesn't mean that he is the author of that evil. So to go back to your initial question, does this therefore prove the argument that you're proposing, those three steps, does it prove that the existence of suffering therefore points to the fact that our God is either not good or not all-powerful? No, of course not. And everything has to be understood within the confines of proper definitions.
Speaking of evil, I've always understood that God is the creator of all things.
Is he?
So then Father Gabriel, if he created everything, did he not create evil? Is he the source of evil as well?
So to piggyback on Father Anthony, no, not really, right? So God in Genesis 1, he's the source of all good things. This is who he is, right? So when he creates only good things. When we speak of evil, to understand where it comes from, we have to speak about what is evil, or more precisely, what is evil not, right? So evil, like St. Basil says in the Hexameron, it's not something in itself. It has no substance. It's evil is essentially the lack of goodness. So God is not the source of evil, yet evil absolutely exists today. Why is that the case? It's because God, who is loving, when he loves, right, he creates with that love. So he's a source of life and a source of love at the same time. So he creates in a loving manner, which means that the person or the being he creates, especially if they are intelligent, that they have a sense of wisdom, of rationale, if you will. He creates them with a choice. He creates them free. That's the only way God can create out of love, is when the other person can choose to love him or not to love him. So evil stems from the fact that a will, so will, look at it from like a chemistry equation type of thing, right? Will plus freedom equals the potentiality of evil. Will means like, so I have a mind, and therefore I can will, and I am free. That on its own equates the notion that I can step away from God, who is good. If I'm able to step away from God because I have that choice, step away from him who is good, that in itself is evil. So when you speak about Adam and Eve, okay, we understand that the serpent was there and whatnot, but that serpent, right, was an angel of light. Why did he choose evil? Did God create evil? No, but he had, because at some point he had a will, a free will, right? So he was able to step away from God into the darkness, away from the light, right? So when God creates Adam and Eve, the fathers speak that he created them. So St. John Chrysostom says that once Adam left the hands of God, like this Adam essentially was perfect. Like there was no sickness, there was no illness in him, there was no death, right? So St. Basil speaks about how it's blasphemy. It's blasphemy to say that God is the author of evil. He can only do what is good.